Poststructuralism, Literary Theory and Practice, presented by Hanan Mudaffar. This is part of a series of lectures on schools of literary theory and their application to literature. Both theory and application are taken from Rivkin and Ryan's Anthology of Literary Theory, with the article on Shakespeare's King Lear used for the application. The presentation is enhanced with scenes from the 1975 BBC production of the play. Reading King Lear and watching the BBC production before starting the lecture would be beneficial. Poststructuralism emerged as a critique of structuralism's quest for stable universal systems of meaning. Thinkers like Claude Lévi-Strauss, Roland Barthes, and Louis Althusser sought deep structures underlying culture, language, and thought. Poststructuralists challenged this, arguing that structures are unstable, historical, and culturally specific. Language, they contended, is not transparent, but a shifting, self-referential system riddled with contradictions. Instead of reinforcing systems, poststructuralism seeks to dismantle assumptions and open space for multiplicity and resistance. With this shift, we now turn to the philosophical catalysts that shape poststructuralist thought. Late 19th and early 20th century philosophy created fertile ground for poststructuralism. Nietzsche and Heidegger challenged the Enlightenment faith in rationalism, progress, and stable meaning. Foucault's Madness and Civilization showed that reason is a historical construct used to exclude otherness. His genealogical method revealed how knowledge and power are deeply intertwined. Deleuze's Nietzsche and philosophy emphasized that reality emerges from shifting, conflicting forces, not stable laws. These disruptions shattered structuralism's foundations, opening the way for post-structuralist critiques of meaning, truth, and identity. Post-structuralism took clearer shape through interventions redefining language, knowledge, and identity. In The Order of Things, Michel Foucault traced how rational knowledge changes historically. He introduced epistemes, historical structures that organize knowledge differently across eras. Jacques Lacan reworked psychoanalysis by modeling the unconscious as structured like language. Identity, in Lacan's view, is produced through external systems, the symbolic order. The self is fragmented and mediated, not unified or rational. These turning points prepared the ground for the radical critiques that defined poststructuralism's emergence. As structuralism's stability collapsed, poststructuralists turned to alternative models for understanding culture and meaning. Madness, experimental literature, and archaic practices offered fertile ground. Georges Bataille explored the experiences of madness, eroticism, and death as disruptions of rational capitalist order. Anthropological studies of primitive societies emphasized the value of ritual, sacrifice, and waste over capitalist utility. Writers such as Stéphanie Mallarmé, Comte de Lautremont, and Antonin Artaud used fragmented experimental language to resist stable meanings. These models paved the way for Derrida's radical critique of meaning itself. Jacques Derrida's Deconstruction marks a major innovation in poststructuralism. Derrida critiqued logocentrism, the tradition privileging presence, speech, and mind as stable foundations of truth. In Of Grammatology, Derrida argued that writing reveals meaning as always deferred and constructed through difference. His concept of deference, combining difference and deferral, captures the endless postponement of meaning. Deconstruction shows that no concept, identity, or text exists outside the unstable meaning of differences. All systems are internally contradictory. Derrida's intervention expanded poststructuralism into radical political, ethical, and economic critiques, such as was taken by Deleuze and Guattari. In Anti-Oedipus, Gilles Deleuze and Philippe Guattari argued that desire is not based on lack, but is a positive, productive force that creates new realities. They introduced the idea of territorialization, showing how institutions like family and state fix desire into stable identities. Capitalism deterritorializes traditional identities, but then re-territorializes them for its own ends. They used schizophrenia as a metaphor for unstructured, liberated desire escaping imposed systems. As poststructuralism radicalized political theory, feminist thinkers reshaped it by challenging the male-centered structures of language and philosophy. Feminist poststructuralists revealed how language and philosophy center male perspectives. Julia Kristeva distinguished the phenotext, or structured language, from the genotext, or pre-verbal drives, suggesting experimental writing can access deeper forces. Luce Erigaray argued that philosophy reflects male norms and called for feminine writing rooted in bodily difference. Hélène Cixous proposed écriture féminine, a sensual, creative style resisting hierarchy. Meanwhile, Jean Baudrillard redirected poststructuralism towards critiques of simulation and hyperreality. Jean Baudrillard argued that modern life is dominated by simulations, copies without originals. In The Mirror of Production, he critiqued Marxism for replicating capitalist focus on production rather than escaping it. Baudrillard showed that signs no longer represent reality, but create it, erasing the difference between the real and the simulated. He called for a radical rejection of the productionist paradigm itself, not merely reform within it. Alongside Baudrillard, Jean-François Lyotard challenged the dominance of grand narrative totalizing systems of knowledge. Jean-François Lyotard famously declared the death of grand narratives, sweeping stories that claim to explain human history, knowledge, and progress. In Discourse Figure, he demonstrated how visual and spatial meanings escape full rational capture, suggesting that knowledge is fundamentally creative and aesthetic. In Libidinal Economy, he advocated freeing desire from repressive systems, emphasizing the playful, transformative power of libidinal energies. These poststructuralist critiques resonated powerfully during the student uprising of May 1968 in France. In May 1968, student revolts in France challenged authority, rationalism, capitalism, and traditional structures of representation. Poststructuralism absorbed and reflected the spirit of resistance, rejecting universal truths in favor of local, provisional forms of knowledge. It promoted difference, play, and experimentation over rigid hierarchies and systems. Poststructuralism teaches us to embrace instability, creativity, and multiplicity, seeing them not as threats, but as vital sources of intellectual and political renewal. These theoretical movements find a powerful literary counterpart in Shakespeare's King Lear, where traditional structures collapse and meaning becomes radically unstable. Jean Jagan's article, Lear's Afterlife, argues that King Lear resists final interpretation and unsettles readers across generations. Drawing on Derrida's Deconstruction, the article shows that the play survives because it refuses closure, stability, or moral solution. Scenes like Lear carrying Cordelia evoke affective shock, disturbing critics and audiences and defying simple ethical readings. Cordelia's death acts as a spectral absence, demanding witness but resisting comprehension. King Lear survives by embodying instability, meaning, identity, and justice remain deferred and fractured. Within this framing, we now turn to specific scenes that dramatize these ideas on stage. A key moment of collapse occurs when Lear, stripped of his knights by Regan and Goneril, desperately attempts to maintain authority through language.
Oh, reason, not the need. Our basest beggars are in the poorest things superfluous. Allow not nature more than nature needs. Man's life is cheap as beasts. Thou art a lady, if only to go warm or gorgeous, why nature needs not what thou gorgeous wearest, but scarcely keeps thee warm. But for true need, you heavens, give me patience. Patience I need. You see me here, you gods, a poor old man, as full of grief as age, wretched in both.
Lear's speech becomes increasingly fragmented, shifting from argument to emotional collapse. His former rhetorical power disintegrates. His appeal to reason fails, exposing reason itself as a fragile social fiction. Kingship collapses. Lear's authority survives only in desperate language, not reality. Identity fragments. Stripped of titles, Lear becomes simply a poor old man. The scene dramatizes how authority, identity, and meaning depend on unstable language. This collapse leads directly to the next theme, King Lear's invitation to multiple conflicting interpretations. This happens when Lear is reunited with Cordelia near the end of the play. In this scene, Lear's language hovers between recognition and hallucination.
You do me wrong. Take me out of the grave. Thou art a soul in bliss, and I am bound upon a wheel of fire, and mine own tears do scald like molten lead.
Sir, do you know me?
You are a spirit, I know. Where did you die?
Seeing Cordelia, Lear imagines her as a spirit already dead. The boundary between life and death, reality and fantasy, collapses. Depending on interpretation, this reunion can be seen in radically different ways. Some readers view it as redemption. Lear has achieved humility, forgiveness, and love at the end of his journey. Others read it as failure. Lear remains broken, unable to fully reconcile with reality. His perception is saturated with death and despair. Still others see it as illusion, a beautiful but delusional fantasy masking inevitable destruction. No final authoritative interpretation is imposed by the text. Instead, King Lear opens itself to multiple conflicting readings that change depending on historical moment, reader perspective, and staging. In poststructuralist terms, the meaning of the play emerges from its instability, gaps, and contradictions, not from any hidden essence. The play refuses closure. It stages trauma, fragmentation, and deferred meaning as central aesthetic experiences. Thus, through its collapse in language and multiplication of meaning, King Lear exemplifies the poststructuralist vision of literature as a self-questioning, endlessly unstable field. In conclusion, poststructuralism emerged as a critical response to the rigid, structuralist belief in universal systems of meaning. Thinkers like Nietzsche, Heidegger, Derrida, Foucault, and Lacan revealed that truth, identity, and knowledge are historically constructed, linguistically mediated, and fundamentally unstable. Poststructuralist literary theory shifted attention from fixed meanings to the play of difference, contradiction, and the endless deferral of signification. Philosophical and political movements expanded poststructuralism's reach, emphasizing multiplicity, play, local resistance, and provisional ways of knowing. Feminist theorists and critiques of stimulation further radicalized the movement, showing how language, power, and culture intertwine in unstable, dynamic ways. Deconstruction emerged as a critical practice exposing the internal contradictions and suppressed tensions within texts and discourses. Ultimately, poststructuralism invites readers to embrace instability, not as a deficiency, but as a condition of possibility for creativity, freedom, and ethical engagement. Applied to King Lear, poststructuralism reveals how the play dramatizes the collapse of meaning, language, and authority and identity, leaving behind a fractured text that refuses stable interpretation and continues to haunt audiences. In the end, both poststructuralism and King Lear challenge us not to seek final answers, but to engage the ruptures, silences, and haunting absences that make meaning and literature possible. Thank you for your attention.